No more beer at lunch. I can't have you guys working on the machines all buzzed out.
You used to?
Hey, those 15 years were a mistake.
These videos are not for children. If you're a children, then piss off.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, the Infuso. And today, I'm here to talk to y'all about that one show that used to wake you up bright and early back in the day. I'm talking, of course, about the George Lopez Show. A show that I myself have a whole lot of love for. When I was younger, I would actively go out of my way to try to watch these and piece them together in my head, because I wasn't exactly watching them in order. And now that I'm older, I'm gonna actively go out of my way to rewatch all of these, although this time I will be watching the episodes in order and breaking them down season by season for all of you. So now that we got that introduction out of the way, let's get right into it. How was the George Lopez Show's first season? Well, what you need to know about the show is that it's nothing special in terms of setup. It's the standard run-of-the-mill family sitcom, from the lame and basic plots that it has, all the way down to the annoying studio audience that doesn't know when to stop applauding. Or start, apparently.
George, if you expect the dog to bite you, you're gonna be happy when he poops on your shoes.
Conceptually speaking, the George Lopez Show is ordinary and bland. But what makes it stand out and what makes it unique are not the situations at hand, but the characters in those situations. George is the clueless head of the household. While fairly successful in his place of business and being a work-oriented boss, outside of work, he's a good-hearted goof trying to raise his children in a world significantly different from the one that he grew up in. Due to the passage of time and the changing of norms, as well as having an upbringing that was probably far from ideal, George finds himself ill-equipped when it comes to raising his own children. The guy means well, but in execution, he usually comes up a little bit short. As the father of the family, he's seen teaching his children lessons from episode to episode. But make no mistake, this man is no Danny Tanner. Almost just as often, he's on the receiving end of a life lesson taught to him either by his wife or even his children at times. I will say, I think the character's probably at his most competent in the show's first season, but that's something that will change almost immediately over time. Let's just say there's people out there who age like wine, and people out there who age like milk. And George Lopez on this show isn't an acquired taste. His wife Angie is often the stern voice of reason. Because when the only other person in a parenting equation is George Lopez, well, I suppose that she would have to be. She doesn't really get a whole lot to do this season, but her presence is definitely felt. The highlight of her time on screen is how well she plays off both George and Benny, and how natural those interactions feel. Their children Carmen and Max similarly don't have a whole lot of character this season. They're not the characters that they would later develop into. For the first couple episodes, they're basically just props or MacGuffins to propel plots forward. In the first couple episodes, there are less characters and more obstacles. It's not really about what they themselves are going through, but instead what their parents are going through in trying to raise them. Don't get me wrong, they're essential to the show, but you could really put anybody else in their place. Their personalities really aren't all that important or developed yet. They're just George Lopez's stock kids. And then you have the real highlight of the show here, Benny. Benny is George's mother who has a fondness for cigarettes and beer, but lacks a fondness for her own son. She's sarcastic at any given moment, and while her zingers usually are played for a punchline, that doesn't mean that there's not some sting to them. She means every word that she speaks. Just because her insults come with a laugh track, doesn't mean that they're not from the heart, or the cold, icy emptiness in place of where her heart is supposed to be. You got George's best friend Ernie, who is really the Barney Rubble to his Fred Flintstone. His primary function is to be so oblivious that it makes George look competent in comparison. He's a gullible goof who unfortunately finds himself lovesick after being taken advantage of by his many love interests in many different ways.
My girlfriend dumped me.
Oh, well, it's her loss, Ernie. You're a catch. And if I had any single girlfriends, I would set you up.
What about Elizabeth?
Nah, that's not gonna work.
So all in all, the show's first couple episodes, even though they were just starting out, still really feel like the show in its later run. The one major element of the show that's missing from the first couple episodes are Angie's father, Vic, who will come into play next season and become very, very important to the show as time goes on. But outside of this one noticeable absence, the show still feels the same. The only other interesting difference here is the character of Claudia, who is George's ditzy secretary. The character is very blatant and unintentionally rude. I think that she's a fun little addition, but apparently she wasn't a welcome one, because she only stuck around for the season after this, and then was gone. I mean, they didn't even write her out, they just stopped writing her in. It's unfortunate because I feel that she fit in pretty well here, and she made for a fun, reoccurring role. Though I guess it wasn't really a major loss for the show, as I doubt many people even noticed her absence. It's not like a shitload of screen time was devoted to her presence, but for the record, I think that she fit in well here. I was also surprised to see Sandra Bullock make her on-screen debut as accident-prone Amy. I guess it makes sense as Bullock was an executive producer on the series, but seeing her make an appearance on an at-the-time brand-new, unproven show is kinda crazy. Although what makes less sense is that Bullock's character barely plays into the plot of the episode, and she really serves no purpose here. She's just there, and then we move on. It's an innocent enough cameo to look past it, but I think her later few appearances on the show definitely blow this one away. A lot of the comedy seems to come from a generational clash. Often George's mother and his wife's parenting methods greatly differ, with George's values lying somewhere in the middle. And for the sake of comedy, whichever particular way he leans is usually depicted as being the wrong. Whether that be by nature or his way of going about it, he's usually in the wrong. I think the show deserves credit for the way it properly portrays family dynamics, because it does so without ever really making anyone a full-fledged hero or villain of the situation. Plenty of issues tackled in the show are relatable from both perspectives. As a kid, I could relate to Carmen and Max not wanting to be babied. I understood their want of more privacy, and as an adult who has a bunch of nieces and nephews, I can totally understand wanting to make sure that your family is safe. Wanting to go above and beyond for them, even if they're asking you not to go above and beyond for them. I understand. I think the George Lopez show does a really good job at showing both sides of these conflicts. And it does so without ever really pointing the finger to say what's right or what's wrong, it just shows what is. Now this is going to sound a little bit weird, but I really like that the show is aware that it's funny. Often in sitcoms, you'll find characters remaining stone-faced or silent as the studio audience laughs. They'll pause for applause, and then they'll just pick things back up as if they never stop. But here, the cast laughs along with the audience. And I like that because it's not always that a show reacts to itself. If a joke is being made, the characters will respond to that joke. Now, I've praised this first season of the show a lot. And the reason for that being is that the first seasons of shows are often just short of a disaster. The first season of a series is seen as the experimental season. And in the aftermath of a show's success, the show's first season or two usually winds up feeling more like a prelude to what viewers would come to know and love. There are signs or elements of the show that would one day be, but it's obvious that they're not quite there yet. Shows like The Office or Parks and Recreation are great examples of this, as those shows' first seasons were so vastly different from the ones that would follow that they hardly feel like they're properly connected. But the George Lopez show, on the other hand, immediately feels like the George Lopez show. I don't watch the show's first season and long for the later years because, well, it was pretty perfect from the get-go. Within the first 5 or 6 minutes of the first episode, I was reminded of everything I loved about the show. It takes very little time acquainting its audience with the setting, characters, and relationship between these characters. They didn't need 2 or 3 full seasons to grow into the characters that they're famous for. They kinda just started off that way. I know that it might sound that I'm really harping on this point, but that's because this isn't something that always happens. You go ahead and try to watch the first season of Friends, and you see how different it is from the final product. In season 1, Monica's normal, Phoebe isn't quirky, Chandler's gay, and Joey's head looks like this. It's definitely a far cry from where that show ended up. But here, with George Lopez, it's the same show. You watch the first episode of the George Lopez show, and immediately they're talking about how awful of a mother Benny is, and how big George's head is. That is episode 1. But that is also episode 120. It's just surprising to me that this show had a blueprint going in, and they stuck to it. No change is necessary. Which shows me that even when the show was in its infancy, it was being fed with quality formula. There was already a good flow to the show, the actors were already perfectly portraying the characters, and the dynamics made sense. But most importantly, this entertained an audience. They didn't have to restructure major portions of the product like so many other series have had to do. All they needed to do was continue to present it and improve it over time, which thankfully they did. Regardless, this season does feel a little bit more like an extended test pilot as it's only 4 episodes long, which is hardly enough episodes to even call it a season, but there was more than enough time to endear an entire audience to this show. This season is short but sweet, simple in concept but great in execution and presentation. It doesn't really do anything exceptional, but what it does exceptionally well. The first 4 episodes deal with George not wanting to celebrate his birthday, George freaking out that his daughter might be engaging in adult activities, George being afraid for his son's safety, and having to choose between firing his mother or best friend. These aren't exactly groundbreaking premises. They're typical sitcom plots. Hell, they're basically tropes. You can find these same stories written elsewhere, many a times over. But seeing these plots play out with these specific characters, and with these specific actors portraying these specific characters, made the mundane interesting. It made something that has been recycled and reused time and time again feel new and fresh. Because it wasn't about what they were doing, it was about the way that they had done it. They didn't do anything different, they just did things better. This season was short but sweet. And it must have done its job, as the following season was given 20 more episodes than this one was afforded. So clearly, they made an impression. And I actually think this may be one of the better first seasons of a show that I've ever seen. And I'm not just saying that because they referenced H.R. Pufnstuf. I mean, of course, yes, that plays a part into what I'm saying, but it's not the only reason. I also want to give credit where it's due. I think the show wasn't afraid to push the envelope. Like, it made the same jokes that a lot of other sitcoms made. They weren't afraid of just taking the joke one step further than a lot of other sitcoms would probably find tasteful.
George, I want out of the carpool.
Frank, you were out of the carpool the minute you tricked Timmy into this van.
That being said, there are still a few criticisms that I have about the show's Ground Zero. But even with the few I do, I can acknowledge they're minor and for the most part are really just small nitpicks. But you know what, since I'm already talking about them, here they are. The scenes that take place in George's workplace are probably the highlight of the show. Except they keep recycling the same background noises every 25 seconds, and once you've noticed that, you can never unnotice that. It gets very distracting.
Beer, lunch break. You want to come?
Ooh, here's a bad thing about that. No more beer at lunch. Attention! Listen. I know you've all heard rumors about layoffs, but they're not true. Actually, I got good news. I didn't want one, that's all.
Why does she want to throw you a party?
Which, by the way, I usually don't notice stuff like this. The fact that I did probably just isn't a good sign. I also find George's acting to be a little too over the top this season from time to time. At times it feels more like he's acting in a play rather than acting in a sitcom. But considering the guy has mostly worked on a stage, yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. It's not bad by any means, but he would definitely go on to have a much more natural presence in the seasons that followed. Carmen's actress is also a little less polished here than she'd be later. But to her credit, she still has her moments and at times manages to steal the show.
Stop it! I can't take your fighting anymore. You're gonna drive me into the arms of a sympathetic gang member.
Couple of notes. You came in a little early. And I didn't believe you at the end.
And Max? Well, Max was played by a child actor. It was as good as it sounds. But I think the biggest problem from my experience with the show's first season was the fact that I watched it on DVD. And apparently, they didn't dish out the money to use Lowrider. So instead of that iconic theme song that everybody relates to this show, I instead got to hear this cheap attempt at a sound-alike. And to make matters even worse, the opening of this opening song sounds like George Lopez coming to his climax. Nope. I did not care for that. Outside all that, I highly recommend the George Lopez Show, as even its first season, made all the way back in 2002, for the most part still holds up. So with all that being said, if you like this video and would be interested in seeing me take a look back at the other seasons of the show, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
Big Head has left. Who's Big Head? It's mostly hair.
You got a big head.
Shut up.
In the meantime, I was your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso, and I thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.